The air in the training hangar carried that mix of oil, sweat, and dust that always clung to the floorboards no matter how many times the cadets scrubbed them. Metal racks lined the walls, stacked with helmets, flak jackets, and gear bags, each labeled with stenciled numbers already fading from use. Overhead, the hum of old fluorescent bulbs created a constant buzz that filled the silence between shouted instructions and the stomp of boots. Morning formation had just ended, and the space was alive with chatter, laughter, and the sound of cadets shoving each other as they hurried to swap uniforms for training drills. Lena Ortiz moved quietly through the crowd, the kind of quiet that came not from shyness but from deliberate control. 50 years old, gray streaks hidden in dark hair tied into a bun that hadn't loosened all morning, she carried herself like a soldier who didn't need rank to command a room. Her step carried a slight limp, the kind that only appeared when the humidity climbed too high, a gift from a fall years ago in a country most of these cadets had never heard of. She wore standard-issue pants, though faded at the knees, a plain black t-shirt, and boots that had seen desert sand, jungle mud, and icy tundra. But what stood out most wasn't her uniform or her scars. It was her stillness. She walked like someone who already knew every exit, who had measured the distance to each wall, who had learned the hard way how to survive when survival wasn't guaranteed. The cadets didn't notice. To them she was just another volunteer trainer, someone old enough to be a parent, here to help with logistics drills. And in their world, old meant irrelevant. The hangar echoed with arrogance. A group of younger cadets, fresh out of academy, were showing off near the storage racks. Their voices carried deliberately, pitched just high enough so everyone within earshot could hear their jabs. They had spotted Lena the moment she stepped inside. She wasn't wearing the crisp, pressed uniforms they prided themselves on. Her boots looked worn, her shirt stretched thin, and the bag slung over her shoulder had patches sewn on that didn't match regulation issue. That was enough for them. "Look at Grandma over there," one of them snickered, tugging at his friend's sleeve. "Guess we've got history lessons today instead of drills." The laughter was loud enough to ripple across the hangar. Others turned, watching to see how far the mockery would go. A second cadet, broader in the shoulders and twice as eager to impress, grinned as he stepped forward. "Bet she can't even keep up with the obstacle course. Probably here to hand out water bottles." The third one, the kind who fed on the energy of others, leaned close to Lena as she passed by. "Nice pants," he said, tugging at the edge of the fabric where it had thinned from years of use. His hand caught the seam, and before she could react, the stitch gave way. With a sharp rip, the side of her pants tore open halfway down her thigh. The hangar erupted in laughter. Boots scuffed against concrete as cadets turned to watch, some hiding smirks behind their hands, others outright pointing. The trio of instigators basked in the attention, their cruelty swelling with each chuckle. One of them clapped the Ripper on the shoulder like he'd just won a prize fight. But Lena didn't flinch. She stood calmly, letting the laughter echo around her like distant artillery she no longer cared to dodge. She tugged once at the torn fabric, checking the damage, then straightened her shoulders. No words. No shout. No retaliation. Just silence. It was that silence that unsettled them. The cadets expected outrage, anger, tears, or at least a sharp rebuke. Instead, they got nothing. And nothing has a way of magnifying itself in a room full of noise. The laughter began to thin, the edges fraying as cadets realized Lena wasn't playing their game. Her stillness was louder than their mockery. Then she shifted. With deliberate calm, Lena pulled off the ruined pants. The room went quiet, not from embarrassment but from what they saw beneath. Her back, scarred, lined, marked by wounds that told stories no classroom lecture ever could. A jagged scar stretched across her lower spine, the kind left only by shrapnel tearing through flesh. Another ran diagonally across her shoulder, a pale groove carved deep by something hot and merciless. On her right hip, the skin bore the circular burn of a round that had grazed but not killed. These weren't the marks of someone pretending at heroism. These were battle maps. The cadets froze. Their smirks dissolved into silence, their swagger into unease. Even the ones who hadn't laughed now stood stiff, realizing they were in the presence of something they couldn't mock into submission. Lena bent down calmly, retrieved the training shorts from her bag, and slipped them on as though nothing had happened. Her movements were economical, practiced, efficient. Every gesture carried the weight of experience, the kind of efficiency born from years of needing to move quickly under fire. She tightened the waistband, adjusted her boots, and stood again, her eyes scanning the crowd without expression. One of the cadets who had started the jeering swallowed hard. His face flushed red, not from embarrassment but from the sudden awareness of what he had provoked. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Because words weren't enough. Across the hangar, an instructor had noticed the silence and started toward the commotion. He was tall, broad, and carried the insignia of a seasoned officer, his expression hard as he cut through the crowd. His eyes landed on Lena first, then on the torn pants in her hand, then on the trio of cadets whose postures had shifted from arrogance to dread. "What's going on here?" the officer barked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned it. No one answered. The officer's gaze narrowed. He stepped closer, catching sight of the scars across Lena's back as she adjusted her shirt. For a moment, the hardened lines of his face softened. Recognition flickered there, not of Lena herself, but of what those scars represented. He knew the kind of battles that left marks like that. And he knew enough to respect them. The cadets shifted uncomfortably, waiting for Lena to speak, to accuse, to demand punishment. But she didn't. She simply met the officer's eyes, then looked back at the trio. Her silence spoke louder than any testimony. It told them she had survived things they couldn't even imagine, and that their mockery had only revealed their own ignorance. The officer turned sharply toward the cadets. "Front and center," he snapped. They obeyed instantly, their bravado gone, their bodies stiff with the weight of sudden consequence. The rest of the hangar watched, the energy shifting from cruel amusement to solemn respect. And Lena? She stood quietly, gathering her gear, her expression unreadable. She hadn't needed to defend herself. Her back had spoken for her. The officer's reprimand thundered through the hangar, a lesson drilled not just into the three cadets but into every set of eyes watching. Respect wasn't earned by mocking scars. Respect was recognizing the strength it took to carry them. The laughter never returned. By the time Lena stepped out into the morning sun, the hangar felt different. The air no longer buzzed with arrogance but hummed with something else, quiet understanding. Word would spread quickly, as it always did in military circles. By evening chow, everyone would know about the woman who endured mockery without a word, and silenced a room with nothing but the truth written on her skin. The sun outside the hangar blazed against the asphalt, heat rising in shimmering waves that distorted the outlines of trucks parked in neat rows. Lena adjusted the strap of her gear bag and kept walking, the weight familiar, the rhythm steady. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The silence she left behind would do the work for her. The base was alive with routine. Recruits hustled from one building to another, instructors barked cadence over the clatter of boots, and the smell of breakfast drifted from the chow hall where soldiers lined up with trays. It was a world where discipline lived in every detail, but arrogance had a way of sneaking in, especially among the untested. That was the danger Lena had seen too many times, when confidence arrived before experience. She crossed the motor pool, weaving between vehicles coated with a thin layer of dust, the kind that never quite went away no matter how many times they were hosed down. Engines rumbled as mechanics crawled beneath hoods, their hands black with grease, their eyes squinting against the glare. A pair of soldiers leaned against a Humvee, sipping coffee that steamed in the already climbing heat. They noticed Lena only long enough to step aside, their nods curt but respectful. They didn't know her story, but they recognized something in her stride. Lena's truck sat near the far edge of the lot, a dented pickup with paint peeling at the corners, its bed littered with old tarps and rope. She had left it unlocked, no one on base would dare touch it. As she reached for the handle, a shadow stretched across the door. "Ma'am," a voice said behind her. She turned slowly, eyes narrowing against the glare, and found the officer from the hangar standing a few feet away. He wasn't looming, but there was weight in his posture, the kind that came from years of command. His name tape read Marshall. His uniform carried the worn creases of someone who worked rather than paraded. "I wanted to speak with you," he said. Lena tilted her head, saying nothing. "What happened in there?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "It shouldn't have happened. Those cadets forgot what this place stands for." "They're young," Lena replied evenly. "Arrogance is part of the curriculum, whether anyone admits it or not." Marshall exhaled through his nose, the faintest shadow of a smile tugging at his mouth. "Maybe so. But scars like yours, those aren't lessons they should mock. They're lessons they should learn from. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of engines and the distant cadence of a drill. Lena studied him, the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands stayed relaxed at his sides even as his shoulders squared. He wasn't just offering words. He was offering recognition. "Where did you serve?" he asked finally, his voice quieter now. Lena's gaze drifted past him, across the lot to the pine trees lining the perimeter. She thought about answering. About telling him the names of places erased from official reports, operations that never made it into history books, missions that lived only in the scars across her back. But she shook her head. "Not where," she said. "When." Marshall frowned slightly. "When?" "When it mattered," Lena said. Her voice carried no anger, only certainty. He nodded slowly, understanding more than she expected. Some officers demanded details to measure worth. Marshall didn't. He respected the silence. "I'm running joint exercises next week," he said after a pause. "We could use trainers who know what it means when it matters." "Think about it." Lena gave the barest nod. No promise, no refusal. She opened the truck door, slid inside, and started the engine. Marshall stepped back, offering her space, and she drove off without another word. The road out of the motor pool cut past the parade grounds where cadets ran drills in formation. Their shouts echoed across the open field, sharp and rhythmic, but as her truck rolled by, a few heads turned. They had heard. News traveled fast, faster than orders sometimes. Eyes lingered on her longer than usual, and for once, there was no smirk, no sneer. Only curiosity. By the time Lena pulled into the small civilian lot near the base perimeter, her mind was already elsewhere. She parked, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the quiet. The laughter, the silence, the officer's words, they all blended into the background noise of memory. She had seen this pattern before. Disrespect, disbelief, and finally, recognition. It never changed. What changed was how much she allowed herself to care. She grabbed her bag and stepped out, her boots crunching on gravel. The lot bordered a line of old supply sheds, their paint chipped, their roofs patched more times than anyone could count. She headed for the one marked volunteers, pushing open the heavy door with her shoulder. Inside, the air was cooler, fans whirring against the heat. Tables were stacked with gear, clipboards, and the inevitable boxes of paperwork that never seemed to diminish. A few volunteers milled about, sorting supplies, logging items, checking lists. They greeted her with nods and quiet smiles. None asked questions. She set her bag down on a bench and began her work. Sorting boots, organizing hydration packs, counting out gloves. The kind of tasks that kept operations moving, the kind that rarely drew attention but always made the difference when drills became real missions. She worked quickly, methodically, her hands steady, her mind calm. But she wasn't alone for long. The door creaked open, and the room stilled as three figures stepped inside. Not cadets this time. Officers. Their crisp uniforms and straight backs made them instantly recognizable. And behind them, hovering like a shadow, came Sergeant Major Daniels. He was broad-shouldered, his uniform neat despite the sweat beading on his forehead, his eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. His presence commanded the room without a word. Conversations died as he stepped forward, flanked by the officers. "Ortiz," he said, his voice steady, even. Lena straightened, setting down the clipboard. "Sergeant Major. You've caused a stir." Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Didn't say a word." "That's the stir," Daniels replied. His eyes swept the room, then settled back on her. "People are talking. Scars like yours, people notice. They ask questions." "Let them," Lena said simply. The officers behind him shifted, exchanging uneasy glances. Daniels didn't move. There's a line, he said, between recognition and rumor. You walk that line, whether you want to or not. Lena folded her arms, her gaze unwavering. Not my concern. Maybe not. But it's mine. Daniel's tone carried weight now, the kind that settled over a room like gravity. This base runs on respect. And right now, some of it's hanging on your silence. You can let it stand. Or you can speak. The room held its breath. Lena looked at him, at the officers behind him, at the volunteers pretending not to listen. She could tell them stories, names, operations. She could give them details that would silence every whisper. But those stories belonged to the fallen, not to her. I don't speak for me, she said finally. And I don't speak for them. Daniel's eyes narrowed, searching hers. He found only steel. Then stand ready, he said. Because silence carries weight. And weight demands strength. With that, he turned, his boots striking the floor with sharp precision. The officers followed, the door swinging shut behind them. Evening settled over the base with the weight of routine, the sun sinking low behind the pines and staining the sky in streaks of orange and red. The motor pool quieted as engines shut down one by one, leaving behind the lingering scent of fuel and hot metal. Cadets moved in clusters toward the chow hall, their voices low, the energy of the morning replaced by the fatigue of drills. Word had already traveled faster than orders, the woman with the scars, the silence that froze a room, the officer who had seen too much to laugh. Lena sat alone at the edge of the lot, her truck parked in the shadows. She had no interest in the cafeteria lines or the chatter of recruits replaying their day. Instead, she pulled a thermos from her bag, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm but still did its job. The quiet suited her. She had lived through too many nights where quiet was a luxury. Here, on this base where arrogance still thrived in corners, silence was a kind of shield. Boots crunched on gravel nearby. She didn't turn at first. The cadence was familiar, measured, deliberate, carrying the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. When she did glance up, Marshall stood a few feet away, his posture relaxed, his eyes steady. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She gestured to the hood of the truck. He climbed up, settling beside her, the two of them facing the horizon where the last light clung to the sky. For a moment, neither spoke. "They're still talking," Marshall said finally. "About you. About what they saw." Lena sipped her coffee. "Let them. They're not mocking anymore. Not today." Marshall studied her profile, the lines etched by years of endurance, the stillness that came from surviving storms most people couldn't imagine. "You know what I think," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "I think they needed to see it." Cadets grow up on stories that don't carry scars. They read after-action reports, hear clean versions of battles. They forget war is written on skin, not just paper. Lena let the words settle. She had heard speeches like his before, from men trying to make sense of things that refused to be neat. But there was sincerity in his tone, not the hollow kind used in ceremonies, but the real kind that came from someone who had watched soldiers bleed. "You talk like a man who's lost," she said quietly. Marshall's jaw tightened. "2 tours. Friends I buried by name. Others I couldn't." Lena nodded once. She didn't press further. Loss had its own language, and she recognized it in his. They sat in silence for a while, the night deepening around them, the base settling into its nocturnal rhythm of patrols and distant hums. Somewhere, a cadence still echoed faintly, fading into the darkness. Finally, Marshall spoke again. "There's an exercise next month. Joint operations. We'll be running interference drills. I want you there." Lena chuckled softly, shaking her head. "You sound like Daniels." "He's not wrong," Marshall said. "You carry silence like a weapon. These kids need to see what that means." Her gaze lingered on the horizon, where the last traces of daylight surrendered to night. And if I say no? Then you'll still have silenced them, Marshall said. But if you say yes, you'll teach them something silence alone can't. Lena finished her coffee, screwed the lid back on, and set the thermos aside. She looked at him fully now, eyes dark and unyielding. You want them to see scars? Or do you want them to learn respect? Both, Marshall admitted. The honesty earned him a small nod. Then maybe, Lena said. Her voice carried no promise, but no dismissal either. They sat until the stars came out, the base lights flickering on one by one, the lot emptying of noise. When Marshall finally left, Lena remained, her eyes on the sky, the weight of silence heavy on her shoulders but not unbearable. For once, it felt shared. The next morning began like every other. Reveille echoed, boots pounded in formation, and the chow hall filled with the smell of powdered eggs and burnt toast. But the hangar was different. The cadets moved quieter, their glances sharper, their laughter muted. The trio from the day before avoided Lena entirely, their arrogance deflated into uneasy caution. Others watched her with something closer to respect, though few dared approach. Daniels stood at the front, his voice cutting through the air. Discipline, he barked, isn't about uniform sharpness or how loud you shout cadence. It's about respect. For the uniform, for each other, and for the weight of those who came before you. His eyes flicked briefly to Lena. Forget that, and you've already failed. The cadets straightened. No one laughed. Lena worked quietly at the side, sorting gear as she always did, but the room had shifted. Silence carried weight, Daniels had said. And now they all felt it. By midday, whispers spread beyond the hangar. Instructors spoke of her scars with reverence, not rumor. Volunteers exchanged nods when she passed. Even the supply clerks, who had once buried her in paperwork, moved faster, sharper, like they knew they were part of something larger than forms and codes. That evening, as Lena left the base, the same 3 cadets waited near the gate. They stood stiff, their eyes lowered, their pride swallowed. One stepped forward, the one who had torn her pants. His voice was steady, but softer than before. "Ma'am," he said. "I owe you an apology." Lena studied him. She saw the nervous twitch in his jaw, the stiffness in his stance, the unspoken fear that she might not accept. "You don't owe me," she said. He blinked, startled. "You owe respect," Lena continued. "Not to me. To every soldier who carried scars so you could wear that uniform. Don't forget that." The cadet nodded quickly, his throat tight. "Yes, ma'am." She stepped past them without another word, her boots steady against the gravel, the weight of silence following her like a shadow. Behind her, the cadets didn't move until she was gone. By the time she reached her truck, the sun had dipped low again, painting the sky in bruised purples and deep reds. She tossed her bag into the back seat, climbed in, and started the engine. The base lights flickered on, casting long beams across the lot. As she drove away, she felt no triumph, no vindication. Just the familiar rhythm of survival, the quiet knowledge that dignity didn't need applause. The scars on her back told their own story, and for once, the world had listened. And sometimes, that was enough. Have you ever seen someone carry scars the world couldn't understand? Do you believe respect should be earned by silence as much as by words? Let us know in the comments. If this story spoke to you, subscribe and share it with someone who values quiet strength. Until next time, remember, true dignity doesn't shout. It endures.